Okay, so we're here today getting together to have a conversation about responsible design. It's worth saying right now that the three of us are absolutely conversational designers, so there is very much a bent towards that. But actually, many of the tenets that we're talking about around the concept of responsible design, what that means, why it's important, ethics, all that good stuff, that's still really appropriate to wider design thinking. So if you're not a conversation designer, you don't need to turn off this video now. Keep watching, there's still good stuff. Without further ado, I am joined here by Maika Coppens. She is the author of a wonderful French conversation design book. So any French readers or French peeps out there, check out her book. It is fantastic. And she is also the VP of Design at Open Dialogue. Hi, Maika. And Romina Pankake, our very own Vixener. Romina is the head of VUX and voice search at Vixen Labs. And her title's so long I had to draw breath in between. And the MD of Vixen Labs Germany. Hi, both of you. Nice to have you here. I'm going to do a quick intro before we open it up, because the whole point is we want to have a conversation, not just listen to me. So I think responsible design, it is such a juicy subject. I could talk about it all day long, forever, times infinity. But why did we actually want to record us having this conversation right now? Well, with International Women's Day happening at the moment, it seemed like a particularly pertinent time to talk about responsible design. And why is that? Well, responsible design is actually, I believe, up for discussion, guys, is all about the choices that we make as designers, really considering the clear decisions that we make or not, and the processes that we put in place when we're designing. And that is inherently, to do that and to have that introspection and to have that conversation, we need to consider bias. And that's where there is this connection to International Women's Day, because bias in design is something that needs to be addressed if you're trying to uphold the principles of responsible design. And this is hugely wide-ranging, everything from gendering all the way through to data privacy. I'm going to say that again. It is hugely wide-ranging, all the way from gendering to data privacy, and everything in between. It's absolutely massive. For me, the starting principles of responsible design are actually linked to the concept of empathic design principles, or designing with empathy, depending on how you want to phrase it. The key tenet of which, for me, is the idea of compassion. And that is moving beyond just goals and use cases, however important they are, UXer in me, but actually to consider the emotional state of the user, which I believe is pertinent in all design, but especially conversational, where you are potentially anticipating a higher level of emotional engagement in the user. And that's everything from the type of information you're delivering, at what point, and how is that acceptable, cognitive load, language, tonality, a hugely broad point. Second of all is trust. That is connected to compassion, but it also most definitely stands on its own 2 feet. Around there, we've got things like transparency and expectation setting, very important in voice. And 2 that are perhaps linked, but not as closely linked to responsible design, but it's very voice focused. One is the social context. So where is the person in space and time, and potentially in a public setting or within a family unit, and how does that influence design? And also frustration, because conversations with machines can still be a little frustrating, and it's down to us designers to consider that and tailor for that. So I wanted to kick off with this idea of compassion and trust, and how that may or may not link to your views on responsible design. So, to the floor, what does everybody think?
You made a few great points there, Jen. And to me, just kind of to roll it back a little, responsible design is about achieving balanced social, environmental, and economic development, to kind of give it a few broad themes, because it is, as you said, very wide ranging. And to do that is to take into account, as you say, your bias as a designer, as a team, working on a conversational project, but also identifying the point at which in the conversational project you need to be making ethical decisions. And whenever a decision is made, to ask yourself the right questions, and to ask yourself questions around, well, how does this sit with some of the guiding principles that we might set ourselves as a team, right? And then the first question obviously is, as a conversation AI project team or a conversation AI product team, what are the guiding principles, the ethical guiding principles by which we want to uphold ourselves throughout this project? And I think that's kind of step number one, right? Because if you dive into a project and you've never ever really considered, other than the high level, oh, we would like to do responsible design, like if you don't make it concrete with a bit of a North Star of these are our guiding principles, then it's just an idea that everyone has in their minds, that when it comes to the day-to-day and a decision needs to be made, and we all know in conversational projects and other design projects as a whole, right, it's a constant chain of decision making until you get to the end. And if at each point you don't go, well, in addition to business logic, in addition to design consideration and design principles, if I have to weigh up two possible outcomes, well, there are these responsible design principles that I've set out in the beginning of my project. How does it weigh up against these? And you mentioned compassion and trust, which I think are very, very important parts of guiding principles. For me, and I think you also said it with context, right, Jen? For me, there's a sensitivity at all points to real world impact. So how does what we are designing here, what we're building here, going to impact the real world of the user? And that goes to the context they are in, right? Are they in a stress situation? Is what we are saying causing more stress, or on the contrary, is it alleviating stress? I think there's also, and I think you mentioned data privacy, and there are other regulations out there as well, specifically in healthcare use cases. But I think for me, what is also important with responsible design is explainability. The fact that you can explain to your users what all these regulations mean, because it's good and well to have a little, like, for example, in chatbot UI, you might have a little checkbox that says, I agree with the privacy statement and conditions, with a link to a web page that has loads of legal lingo of which you understand nothing. So I think explainability is really important to me as well. Clarity, that everything that was, and that goes not only to data privacy, just overall, right? In everything that a machine is saying to our human users, how clear is it? How understandable is it? How readable is it? There's something around using words that are understandable, using sentences that are understandable, and that then goes into obviously inclusion, and goes into the fact that we all have our own language bubbles that we live in, and the bias that we need to be aware of there, because that's the thing with bias, right? You don't know what you don't know, and
exactly.
And I think for me, that then goes to the responsibility of the individual in a team, is to to raise a flag for yourself that is, I am profoundly biased, no matter how much I would like to think that I'm not, as an individual. And what can I do to educate myself to broaden my perspective and to be aware of that bias? And because I like the fact that you talked about empathy, Jen, and I finished on that because I also want to give Romina a chance to talk. I read a very interesting book a few years ago now called Empathy at Scale by Dana Pavlikova.
Yes.
And she talks really well about the fact that sometimes what we identify in design and in projects as empathy is really projection. And she explains that empathy should be informed empathy, informed by data, informed by diverse and equitable data collection and data sets, and that even within empathy, we need to be aware of the bias that we bring with the empathy. So it sounds very complicated, but there are things that we can do, I think, at each step of the conversation design process to keep ourselves, our team, our project in check, and to make the right decisions wherever we can, and moreover, advocate for the right decisions being made.
I think as designers, I've said this before, I'll say it again, is I think as designers, we have to be prepared to be quite confronting to ourselves, not only to confront and question the project, to make sure that, you know, we are keeping aligned to those North Star principles, which I think there are some core principles of human-centric UX thinking that that's another conversation. Part of this, but also a whole other conversation. And also some that are specific to the project, right? You know, we're talking about very specific compassion in moments. It's going to be very different if you're doing a conversational AI project that's a kids' entertainment thing versus giving financial advice. Those are two very different states, and those are going to create a different North Star. But I think there is that confrontation, and I think I mean, for us at Dixon, we are very often building on the existing platforms that are out there, right? Whether or not that is, you know, in terms of the actual, sort of, I guess, distribution platforms. So actually, you know, an Alexa or something like that. So actually building upon Amazon, and or within that also language models that we have not necessarily made ourselves. And I think there could be a temptation to kind of throw your hands up and go, well, I don't have any control over that. You know, that's over and beyond me. I can't necessarily, you know, ensure responsible design when it's out of my hands. And yet, and this is really, I think, the core thing that we're talking about, there is so much you can do when you're prepared to question yourself and confront yourself as a designer. There's a huge amount that you can do. Absolutely. Romina.
Yeah, and just to expand on that a little, and there's so much I would also like to say to what both of you said, but I think we might just move on because we already said there could be so much we can talk about. Yeah, I think there's, no matter which platform you build for, there's so much you can do, and what both of you said was, it all starts with being aware of the responsibility you have and reminding yourself, especially also of the bias you might have yourself. So user research, 100% always important. But I think we can do so much to make sure we convey a trustworthy surrounding for the user, make sure they feel comfortable and they are informed. And yes, of course, there's a lot of limitations or requirements, anything that comes from platforms, but the core of the design is still with us, and we make those choices, right? Like Jenny said that at the beginning, we make the choices, and I think this can be kind of taken further. We make the choices, we also design the choices the users can even take, right? So, or make, and being aware that with whatever we offer and however we word that, we have so much impact. And I would say even more so than on any other platform, also taking into consideration how unfamiliar some users might still be with voice, right? And there's still some maybe not everyone, of course, but some lack of like knowledge how it works, or just some insecurity. And I think that's important to keep in mind too. Here is let's take websites as an example. I would say most people kind of are familiar with the concept of a website. They will know I just clicked on an advertisement, so whatever I'm going to get next might be quite promotional, salesy, whatever. Right? I would assume many people will know.
People know what a banner is.
Exactly.
For
and
example,
they will kind of
with them.
exactly, right? And they will kind of expect to be kind of receiving promotional messages, right? And they will also know if I click on an FAQ page or a service page, or if I then call a hotline, that's different channels with different type of information. So you have this kind of, for yourself, the sensor, like where am I looking at? But with voice, we are, as designers, we are going to be the ones aggregating the information, maybe from different existing channels. We are going to be the ones deciding this is what we will say to the user, or what the bot will say on behalf of us, I guess you could say. But there's no, that's the single source of truth then, right? So for the user, this is one chatbot giving advice, answering questions, but there's no evidence on where that information came from. So making the decision to be like true to the user, to bridge that gap, I think is very important. And I feel like that's even, more impactful in conversation design than it might be in other areas, just because of the kind of, I don't want to say it's a new medium, right? But still, for many users, it's still
not new to us.
Not as known,
might still be new to some people.
and not as well known the concept of it as like websites, for example. So I think that's important to keep in mind when making
Really
those
good
decisions.
point. Maika, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to Romina's point, is that we are mostly informing a lot of the choices. If we're not making them ourselves as conversation designers. I think one that I could talk about for hours, and I probably talk about all the time, is the choice of the voice that you're using in voice user interfaces. It is also the famous persona or avatar or whatever, and the choices that are made there. And sometimes these are business decisions and brand decisions, but you are mostly there in the room as a conversation designer, and your advice is being asked. And you can decide to, when a stakeholder asks you for a few options for an avatar in the chatbot UI, you can decide to have neutral avatars. You can decide to have a range of diverse ethnicities. When it comes to voice, same thing, you can have a range of diverse voices. And here are a few options for you, dear stakeholder. And you make that choice, and you can advocate for making the responsible choice. And I think that that's only one piece of the puzzle where we can influence. I think the other part where we're also in charge is the decision on how flexible we make our conversation design and how flexible we make our model. Because there are, as you say, Romina, users that are already quite familiar. There are also users that have difficulties with attention span, neurodiverse audiences that prefer listening at things at a very high speed, skipping parts of the journey to go straight to the point, audiences that don't get what second degree is, and all of these choices that we make around how flexible our model is, how well you can skip certain parts of the conversation to get the thing done if you want to, how flexible rhythm, speed, speech, etc. is, and sometimes you can't influence that, but loads of the time now in a lot of the platforms you can actually tailor the setup to allow for rhythm acceleration, etc. So that you can actually design for a wide range of different cognitive behaviors and account for that. And then obviously that's more in the model, but then the next part is obviously word choice. What is the impact of the words that you are using? Because some words might be, or colloquialisms or expressions might be very seem very normal or very unharmful to you or to a project team, but might actually be very triggering to certain audience. And it's really important to check your design for that, to make sure that you are not using these expressions that might have a more difficult context.
And it might sound obvious, but especially in translation, and I know that might sound obvious, but it's really important to check with a native speaker. I always say that it's not translation, it's transcreation. It's a bit cheesy, but really is important to consider it in that way. It's not about just swapping the words out.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's about taking into consideration also the principles of cross-cultural design. And as you say, it is transcreation in that sense as well. I totally agree. I've been, how do you say this? Banging the transcreation horn for quite some time as well. I think,
owing to the amount of languages you speak, Maker, that's also very personal experience as well. I know we're coming up on time pretty closely, but Romina, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on a few points, Michael, you just made. Very interesting, and yes, good point on the flexibility of choices or the system we create. I do think, and also the words we choose, right? I feel like what we see a lot is either people who make choices completely different from what you would have thought they would say, so bias again, right? But the other thing is what we at least
analytics, what's lurking in your analytics after you've launched the product.
Yeah, 100%. And then what we also see there is like a lot of times people say exactly what you just said in your prompt, right? So again, being aware of that, or maybe even being aware that users might not have fully understood what they are about to choose because they are basically repeating the choice that may have come last, for example, right? So basically just being aware of how people may be handling the prompt or the conversation they're having in voice. I think that is very important to just keep repeating yourself off. And yes, analytics really helps there for sure. And I think one other thing that I just find quite interesting and challenging when we were talking about like being transparent and explaining and making sure the user is informed in their decisions, one thing that you will always come across is the challenge of length of text, right? So I do think that's going to be always this key question, right? How much are you going to explain? And how much is too much? Like in other media, you would have your little star and you can caveat here and there and applies in 99% of the cases, whatever. In voice, you have to be like so short, but at the same time, want to make sure the user is informed. And there's no particular solution here, but I think it's an interesting challenge we all constantly have, right? Like how much should you say and what should you not say? And how do you bring across those main points that you need to make sure the user is informed properly.
Absolutely. So, and even if you're using things like, memory, so whether or not someone's a first time user, second time user, fifth time user, and you're using tapering and all of that, still it's a game of Goldilocks. What temperature porridge is the right temperature porridge? How much information is the right amount of information? And it's tricky because I would love to put everything that is ever designed out to the most rigorous amount of user testing before it's launched, but that unless you're working on a long-term singular product, that's not always possible. So it is quite hard, and there is quite a weight on designers to kind of make informed but essentially make assumptions. And that's also where analytics comes in, because you can find out things about your product while it's out in the wild. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I feel like we're only just warmed up and we could keep talking for absolutely ever. I'm going to leave it on something that actually came up as a conversation in Vixen Labs last week, because I find it quite a tasty thing to end on. And that is the question of, there is a lot floating around at the moment around the dangers of using AI responsibly and bias, especially around generative AI and large language models and ChatGPT in particular. And something that actually came up in a UX brainstorm was actually using ChatGPT to thread through scenarios or thread through questions to throw up. For example, let's just talk about language, right? We've spoken about the fact that all the different synonyms I might have for something is just the list of language I have in my head. but actually potentially being able to use generative AI to list out everything, or to, you know, have a conversational experience where it might spit out things that you might not expect, is a whole different way. Like, you never thought that, you know, maybe this could be used to help challenge our biases rather than only being a potential extra threat. Just throwing that one out there. We are very much at time. This was amazing. I feel like we might need to have another conversation. If anyone has listened to anything and they were like, hang on, you did not talk about that enough, or I really want to know about that. I know we've been throwing around lots of the UX buzzwords. Please let us know and we'll get together and have another chat. Thank you so much, Jamaica, and to Romina. You've been a dream. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.